Today we're going to be learning Ketubot Daf Ayin Gimel. It's the Daf for Shabbat. We're going to start at the bottom of Ayin Bet Amud Bet. Before we start, we'll just review the beginning of the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said, "Hamekadesh et isha al manat she'en aleha nidarim." He betrothed someone on the condition that she not have any vows incumbent upon her. V'nimtzu aleha nidarim, and then it turns out that the condition wasn't fulfilled because she did have vows upon her. The betrothal is dissolved. There is no betrothal. That means basically there's no need for divorce. Knasas stam, if he betrothed her without specifying, turned out she had nidarim on her, then she leaves, meaning he can divorce her, means they are actually valid. It's a valid marriage, but without a ketubah. Now there's a bit of a lack of clarity about how to read this. Is this a new case, or is this? The first case was kiddushin, the second was kin lechanes, which means to marry. Is this based on the previous, meaning if he betroths her upon condition and then he marries her without mentioning that condition, then he might need a divorce from that. And that's or is it a totally different case? We're going to talk about that as we see the Gemara unfold. So Itmar. So specifically, this mention that I just did, the second optional reading of the Mishnah, is actually a machloket between Rav and Shmuel, what the halacha would be. If he betrothed her upon condition and then married her without specifying anything about any sort of stipulation about her vows, Rav Rav says she needs a get, meaning it's a valid marriage. Meaning what we really are talking about here, they don't say, but if it turns out that she has vows upon her, so Rav says she's going to need a get. Shmuel Amar get. She doesn't need a get because the marriage is off, because of the stipulation in the kiddushin. Rav seems to ignore the stipulation in the kiddushin, and we're going to see why. So there's going to be two explanations of this machloket. The first is Abaye, that will take us for about half of today's daf. Then we're going to get into Raba. So Abaye says, Amar Abaye, lo tema tame de Rav. Don't say that, okay, he started first, right? T1, time one, starts, he betroths her with a condition, stipulation. T2, he marries her. No stipulation at this point. Does that mean doesn't care anymore about the stipulation he made? Maybe he's come to love her enough in between that he doesn't really care. Well, don't say that. It's not that he was ichule achle, meaning he was mochel. He said, it's fine. It doesn't bother me. Ella, Tama de Rav, lefisha ein adam oseh bi'ilato bi'ilatznu. That's not the reason. The reason why Rav said is because the assumption is if he gets married, that means they're having relations. A person would never have relations with a woman if it wasn't clear he was going to end up being married to her. Otherwise, it would make it like bi'ilatznu, right? Like sleeping around with someone he's not married to. So, therefore, it must be that when the kiddushin wasn't really a valid kiddushin because the condition was never fulfilled. But when he does the be'ilah, when he has relations with her, he does it with the thinking that I'm doing this to redo my kiddushin with her and do it without a stipulation. And therefore, that's why they're fully married, according to Rav. And Shmuel basically says, no. When he does the kiddushin, the be'ilah, the relations with her, and the marriage, he does it based on the original kiddushin. And if the kiddushin had a stipulation, obviously we continue that stipulation. And that's going to be valid all throughout. The act of be'ilah later is not going to be a be'ilah l'shem kiddushin for the purpose of betrothal. It's just going to be a be'ilah in the context of, we're married now, we're going to have relations. But not that it's a kiddushin l'shem bi'ah. In order to you can betroth a woman in three ways. Kesef, shtal, bi'ah. Kesef is money. That's how we do it, with something with monetary value. We usually use a ring. Shtar is a document. And bi'ah means having relations. But it's only if you have the relations with the intent of doing this for the purpose of kiddushin. So again, Shmuel's going to say, he obviously, when he did the kiddushin, he meant that be the stipulation for the rest of, right, this continuum of the relationship, kiddushin, nisuin. And if the kiddushin condition is never fulfilled, even after they do the nisuin, basically, if he finds out that it wasn't true and she had vows upon her that he didn't know, the marriage is off. Okay, dissolved without any need for a divorce document. Rav says, no, clearly when he did the Be'ilah, he was it was redoing the Kiddushin L'Shem Bi'ah. He did a new Kiddushin that had no stipulation attached to it. To which the Gemara asks, if you're going to say that's the Machloket Abaye, it's the exact same Machloket they have in Yevamot. We already learned this. Good review if you learned Yevamot. If you didn't, it'll be learning something new. Di Itmar, as it was said. Again, Itmar is an intro to a Machloket Amoraim. We just had it here with Rav and Shmuel's Machloket, and we're going to have it with their Machloket there. Ktana Shalomi Anna Vihigdila. You have a minor who was betrothed by her father. When she was, not by her father. Father wasn't around. She was betrothed by her mother or brother. In that case, the marriage only has validity on a rabbinic level. She can do what's called mi'un. She could refuse until a certain age. So, Lomiana, she didn't refuse, and higdila, and then she became of age. Now, at that point, she can no longer refuse. And if she did, let's say, anyway, refuse after that age, amda v'niseit, and she got up and she left the marriage and she went and married somebody else. Rav amar ein tzricha get misheni. She doesn't need a get from the second husband because she wasn't really married to him, because her marriage to the first one was fully valid, which we're going to explain in a minute. And therefore, if her marriage is fully valid, any marriage or betrothal she does after she married this other person is totally irrelevant. What we say, ein kiddushin tofsim. There's no validity to the marriage. Now, what happened here? According to Rav, she was betrothed to this person, but she was only betrothed on a rabbinic level, because only the father can betroth a minor on a Torah level. So the father wasn't around or was dead. The mother or brother did it. It was a betrothal on a rabbinic level. Now, if it was a betrothal on a rabbinic level, then when she marries the next person, that's going to be, and she's already older, that betrothal is going to be, or marriage is going to be a Torah level marriage, which means it's going to be valid because the first one was only rabbinic. So comes Rab and says, no, but wait, she was still married to her first husband when she became of age. That means when they had relations, let's say after her 12th birthday or something, they had relations, he had the intent that this is a new Kiddushin. I'm now betrothing her in order to turn it into Torah level marriage. And that's why the marriage is of Torah level. And when she now marries someone else, it's totally irrelevant. So Rav says, Eina tzricha get misheni. That's why she doesn't need a get from the second. Shmuel amar tzricha get misheni. But Shmuel says she needs a get from the second husband. Why? Because when he had relations with her after, there was no unique act. Oh, I'm doing a kiddushin l'shem bi'ah. I'm doing bi'ah l'shem kiddushin. I'm doing an act of having marital relations with you in order to create have a new betrothal that will be by Torah law. No, he just was having relations with her in the context of marriage. He wasn't thinking, meaning their marriage remained on a rabbinic level, which means that when she goes and marries somebody else by Torah law, that is a valid marriage because she's not married by Torah law to the first person. So therefore, she's going to need a get from the second husband, okay? Because their marriage was valid. That's the debate between them. To which the Gemara says, this is the exact same debate, because the issue is when he has this betrothal when he has the marital relations with her, in case number one, where there was a stipulation and then he had the marital relations without any stipulation, or in case number two, where she was married on a rabbinic level and now she's come of age, so now he has relations with her when she's older. According to Rav, that second act of relations, right, the later one, that act basically is a renewal, like a new kiddushin, a new betrothal. And Shmuel doesn't view it that way at all. It's just in the context of marriage. Wasn't meant to replace the first kiddushin. So it's the same thing, really. To which the Gemara says, tzricha. We need both cases. Why? If you had it only in the first case, you would say, in the second case, with the woman who is a minor, you would say, Rav would say it there because there's no condition. Since there's no condition, and basically everybody knows that she was a minor and it was only rabbinic, and of course when she gets of age, he's now going to betroth her. He's going to have relations with her with the intent to betroth her on a Torah level. That's much easier. But when there's a stipulation and he stipulated something in the Kiddushin, Maybe they agree with Shmuel that he meant for the stipulation to be there, and he wasn't trying to redo the kiddushin. The second, when he married her, he was continuing on with the stipulation that he made from the beginning. And therefore, they need to tell you that they argue in both cases. And now we have to do the reverse. So why don't you just say it in that case? Then it would have been obvious in the case of the minor. Yitmar Baha, if you had it in the case of the stipulation, you might have said it's the same logic, just reverse. Baha Kamar Shmuel, that's where Shmuel says, because there's a stipulation, that's why we're going to basically say the marriage is invalid when the stipulation isn't fulfilled, even though he didn't specify it at the time of the marriage. Aval Bahach, but maybe with this rabbinic marriage, Rav, that when she becomes of age and he has relations with her, he does mean to create a deoraita, a Torah law marriage by that act of marital relations. In which case, sricha, we need to teach you that actually they argue both cases. Because one could argue, maybe you would think that they wouldn't argue in the other case. In the end, they do. Tana. Now we have a question on Shmuel according to Abaye's explanation. Look at our Mishnah. Knasastam. Now we're going to go back to where I started. So the second line in the Mishnah is Knasastam, which means if he betroths her without any stipulation, and then it turns out she had vows, so she leaves the marriage, meaning she needs a get, without getting her ketubah money. To which they say, ketubah de lo baya, hagita baya, right? She obviously needs a get. It's only saying she doesn't get her ketubah money. My love, now they assume, isn't this a continuation of the previous case? Kid shal tnai, he made a stipulation in the kiddushin, but then knasastam, but then he married her without the stipulation. And what do we see here? She needs a get. That's a tiyuf to Shmuel, who said she doesn't need a get. So turning now to Amabet, the Gemara says lo. Kichastam uknasastam. Aval kichal tnai uknasastam. Oh, period. So towards the Gemara says, no, the second case is a new case entirely. Okay, that again. First case is he betroths her with a stipulation. If that she doesn't have any vows. If she has vows, the marriage is off. But if he betroths her and marries her, in other words, it doesn't say anything about betrothal, but the assumption is kichastam. He betrothed her without a stipulation and he married her without a stipulation. Then what will happen? Then he needs to divorce her. If it turns out she had vows and he doesn't want to be married to a woman with vows, then he can divorce her. He has to divorce her if he wants to not be married to her, but he doesn't have to give her the ketubah money because, right, it's sort of a breach of contract that she had all these vows on her and she didn't tell him about it. So that's the way we read the Mishnah, in which case it's not a difficulty for Shmuel. So again, there's two readings to the Mishnah. This one's saying if you want to hold by Shmuel, you have to read it this way. But now they're going to ask another question. According to this, Aval kichal tnai v'knasastam, if he betrothed her by condition and then married her without stipulating anything, hachinami tilo bayagita, you want to say that there's no get? Well, that doesn't fit so well into the Mishnah, and we'll tell you why. Aditani, what was the case they brought in the Mishnah, the first case? He betroths her with a stipulation that she doesn't have vows incumbent upon her. And it turns out she had nidarim. She's not betrothed. Now, why is that a question? Because which case is more obvious? That case is more obvious. Which case is less obvious? So, Litany, you should have taught the less obvious case. You should have taught that knasas stam. If kichal tnai and then kichastam, he betroths her on condition and then he marries her without any condition. Right? That's the case you should have said. If what we're saying right now, according to Shmuel, is that case, she wouldn't be married at all, then you should have taught the more complicated case, the less likely case, and then the koshkenha. Then it would have been obvious that if he makes a stipulation and then he doesn't do any sort of act of marriage without stipulating anything, of course the marriage would be off. So that's then the Gemara answers to answer how to read Shmuel, how Shmuel would read the Mishnah. Hachinami kama. This is really how it reads. Hamikadesh ta'isha amanat she'en aleha nidarim uknasa stam v'nimtzu aleha nidarim ena mikudeshet. If he betroths a woman so that, right, under the stipulation that there won't be nidarim, And here they add two important words. Uknasa stam. They basically say the Mishnah means he betrothed her on condition, but didn't marry her on condition, married her without any stipulation. And then, so basically saying what we said the Mishnah should have said according to Shmuel. Well, let's just say the Mishnah says that. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, and then, right, the Mishnah continues to say, if he betrothed her without any stipulation and he married her without any stipulation, then we would say he can divorce her, but doesn't need to give her the ketubah. Okay, and then the two cases are the two cases that we've been discussing. So again, the first case of the Mishnah is kitcha stam, kitcha al tannai with the stipulation, and then married her without any stipulation. And the second case is neither was with a stipulation. And the difference between them is one, she doesn't need a get, and then the second, she needs a get. So now the Gemara is going to question that. Okay, wait. Case number 2, ketubah hu delo baya. She doesn't get her ketubah money, but hagita baya, but she does need a get. Umashna ketubah delo baya. What's the reason why she doesn't need a ketubah? Why she doesn't get her ketubah money, which should then be the same why she would need a get. Okay? Why doesn't she get her ketubah money? Right, for the same reason, she wouldn't need a get. Why doesn't she need a ketubah? Because basically he says, I can't be married to an isha, a woman who takes vows. And that's right. That's a breach of contract. You should have told me you were this kind of woman. So if so, then theoretically he's basically saying this is what we call a mekach ta'ut. I never meant to be married to you. So you should be able to say, you don't need to get, you're not married to me at all. To which we're going to have two answers. The first answer is to say, your question is actually right. And in fact, you don't really need to get. However, Amar Raba, tzricha get midivreihem. The rabbis instituted that she needs a get. The rabbis didn't like the way it looked. Why? If I'm married to someone and turns out I made all these vows and there was no stipulation in the marriage about it, and my husband gets upset and says, I don't want to be married to this woman who has all these vows upon her, and he can just leave the marriage without anything, because according to this, it's a breach of contract, and he could, because that's why I lost my ketubah money, and that's why theoretically I don't really need to get. But people on the outside will see this. They won't know because they didn't see a stipulation in the marriage, in the betrothal, and they'll see that they won't know that I have vows upon me. So they're going to say, oh, looks like people can get out of marriage without anything. And that is going to cause a lot of confusion. First of all, people might doubt that I'm actually really right. I'll go to get married. People will have issues with me getting married, or maybe they'll think that other people can do this also. Just get out of marriage much more easily than trying to get a get. So we definitely don't want that happening. And that's why Raba says you have to get a get. Rava gives a different answer. Rava Amal, Tana Sipuke Misapkale. Really? This whole thing is an issue of doubt. We don't know. Is it? Is it not? Okay? Is it that basically this whole machlok of Rav and Shmuel, we're basically going to say that it's a debate, that it's unclear what the halacha is. So therefore, Gabe Mamona, okay, the Mishnah basically is saying we're not really sure. If we're not really sure, again, kicha al tnai, he betroths her upon condition, and then he marries her without, he does it stam. He does it without any stipulation. Sorry, not machlok of Rav and Shmuel. He does it kicha stam. He doesn't stipulate anything. Then king sastam. He doesn't say anything. And then all of a sudden, it turns out she's an isha hadranit. It's not clear, really. Okay? And you might have thought this, right? It's a little strange to say he can just, right? He doesn't need to be married to her anymore. And this is a breach of contract. He never specified. So the Tana isn't sure how to treat it. Therefore, when you're unsure, what do you do? Well, it depends what the issue is. Gabe mamona, when it comes to money, can she demand her ketubah money? We always know. Anyone who wants to get money has to prove it. In this case, we're going to go lekula, meaning kula for him. It's leniency for him. He doesn't need to pay it because unless she can bring proof, which she can't because we don't know the answer, then she's not going to get her ketubah. But gabe isura, but are we going to say she's a married woman? Yes. We're going to be strict in that way and say, since we're not sure, are you married? Are you not married? Let's just call you a married woman to be strict on the isura issue. The isura v'hater, is she married or is she not? So therefore, Ketubot and get are two very different issues. We've seen this in Yevamot also. We've seen this before this issue that there's two different issues going on here and they're from two different categories. And that way a suffix situation gets judged differently. So according to one opinion, you really don't need a get, but we're going to do it on a rabbinic level. According to the second opinion, you actually do need a get because we're going to go l'chumra, and when it comes to get, ketubot, we're going to go l'kula. And that's why there's a different law for each. That was all within Abaye's understanding of Rav and Shmuel. Again, Abaye is saying that Rav's issue is, ein adam useh bilato bilatznut, and therefore, if he betrothed her with a condition, then married her, we assume when he did the marital relations with her, the idea was to do it l'shem kiddushin without any stipulation. And according to Shmuel, the original stipulation still stands, and therefore she's actually not married, right? Because we're going to assume if it turns out she had vows, she is not married to him at all. Okay, mekach ta'ud. And Rav doesn't hold that way. He thinks she's married because he does the betrothal. Kind of, it's the marriage, but it acts also as the betrothal. Raba has a different way of reading. Amar Raba, machloket b'ta'ut shtei nashim. He says the debate is about someone who makes a mistake with two women. Okay, what does that mean? It means someone betroths two women. The first woman he betroths, he does it with a stipulation on the condition that you're not a nadranit, a vow. You don't have vows upon you. The second woman, he doesn't make that stipulation. Now it's a debate. Do we assume that since he made the stipulation with the first, he meant it with the second? So if in the end, the second one turns out that she had vows, the marriage is invalid. That's Shmuel. Rav says no. Maybe he distinguishes between woman A and woman B. Maybe he liked the second wife better. So he was willing to do it even if she was someone who took vows. But if it's a mistake with one woman, which we were discussing before, according to Abaye, everyone agrees that she doesn't need a get. Everyone agrees the original stipulation still stands and the marriage is invalid. Abaye says to him, what are you talking about? The Mishnah is discussing a case of mistake of one woman. So how do you start introducing this issue of two women? And they asked all these questions and issues that they raised before, which all had to do with Isha Achat, right? So, right, we saw the question, why did Rav and Shmuel say the same thing twice? Okay, those are all cases of, right, 1 second. Tvina and Tiyuvta. Thing. Yeah, it's a reference to all the questions they asked against Shmuel in the previous section. Okay, where it's all assuming that it was one woman. We never had this thing about two women until now. So therefore, they have to change what Raba said. Forget what I just said. Raba said, new explanation. It's when you have one woman, when it's like two women. Okay, this is going to be a little confusing. What's the case? Rashi says, if you look a bunch of lines down in Rashi, he betrothed her with a condition. Then, he divorces her from the betrothal. Then, and then he goes and remarries her, but without stipulating anything. So now you can see where this is going. Do we say, since he stipulated the first time around, if he finds vows the second time around, well, the marriage is off? Because even though we didn't say it, we assume, right? He said it the first time, he must have meant it. The second time just didn't say it. Or do we say, no, the second one is divorced entirely from the first one, right? It's a whole separate marriage. If he didn't stipulate, there's no stipulation. So what if she turns out to be a woman with vows? He never said he doesn't want a woman with vows, so the marriage is valid. That would be rough. And that's the machlok. But if it's just regular mistake of one woman, meaning kidsha al tnai, and then knasa stam, he first betrothal was with a condition. The marriage was without any stipulation whatsoever, which was what Abaye said the machloket was about. He says, even Rav doesn't think she needs a get in this case. It's classic mekach ta'ut. It was a mistake. And the fact that he married her without specifying didn't mean he wasn't counting on the original Kiddushin to have the stipulation. He wasn't doing anything new. He was just continuing it. So now the assumption that they all agree about Ta'ut Isha Achad is going to be the source of the next slew of questions that Abaye is going to ask on Raba. Eitiv Abaye. Kid Shabbat Ta'ut. He's going to basically bring all these sources where we see it's a mistake with one woman, and there's a machloket about it. So to say everybody agrees that for sure it's an invalid marriage and it's a makach ta'ut, it's a mistake in marriage, no, it's not true, says Abaye. And each time, Raba is going to have to explain the source in a bit of a different way. Eitiv Abaye. So first question is from the Tosefta in Kiddushin. The first two are going to be from the Tosefta in Kiddushin. Kid Shabbat Ta'ut. He betrothed her by mistake. We're going to assume the mistake is what we're talking about here. Mistake with one woman. Upachot mishav pruta, or he betrothed her with less than the value of a pruta. That means there wasn't enough money for it to be considered a valid marriage, or betrothal, or katan v'chein katan shekidesh. If he was a minor's kiddushin is not valid. Afal, so in each of these three cases, afal shalach siv lono, these are presents that the groom's family would bring to the bride's family, even if after this happened, where it was an invalid betrothal for whatever reason, he sends gifts to the family of the bride, and a mekudeshet. The kiddushin is not valid, right? A karmikim would be, let's say, first of all, with the money, so he's sending money, which would then be value of a pruta. Maybe he was doing it l'shem kiddushin. With the katan, he does it when he's older already. He sends the gifts, okay? With the mistake, he's saying, I don't care that I made the mistake, right? In other words, that would be like kinsas stam. So what do we see here? Even though he sends, ena mekudeshet, machmat kiddushin harishonim shalach. She's not mekudeshet because that clearly sending the gifts is not a meaningful act at all, okay? Even though I kind of suggested maybe it was, it's clearly not, is what they say, because that's based on the original kiddushin. The original kiddushin wasn't valid. The gifts are meaningless. But here comes the machloket. In ba'alu, if he has relations with her, kanu, then he basically acquires her. So if he did it when he was older, right? He did it. We don't care anymore about a shavapruta because you can do kiddushin even without money. You could do it by having relations. So his relations must have been l'shem kiddushin to fix the problem of the shavapruta. And if it was the mistake, again, you say, what does it mean, the mistake? It means it was done on condition. The condition wasn't met in the end, but it doesn't matter because when he married her, he had intent that he was going to do it without any stipulation, and that overrides the original kiddushin. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ben Yishmael, Amal im ba'alu lo kanu. So Rabbi Shimon says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, they say, if he had relations with her, lo kanu. That doesn't do anything. This is exactly the machloket Rav and Shmuel, right? V'ha dita'ut isha achati. This is the way, right, that Abaye understood the machloket Rav and Shmuel, but according to Raba, this is ta'ut isha achati upligi. And according to Raba, there shouldn't be a machloket because he said everyone agrees that it's not a valid marriage. And here you see it's a debate whether it's valid or not. And my lav ta'ut nidarim, is the ta'ut not ta'ut nidarim, like our case where he made a stipulation about her being a woman who vows, theoretically that could be a possible mistake. To which the Gemara says, no, lo ta'ut pachot mishavet pruta. You could say the mistake was that he thought it was a pruta, it turned out to be less than a shavet pruta, and that was the mistake. To which the Gemara says, but there's three cases. Case number 2 is pachot mishavet pruta. You can't say case number 1 was pachot mishavet pruta. Pachot mishavet pruta be'edi katani. It says explicitly there were 3 cases: ta'ut, pachot mishavet pruta, and katan. So how could you say case 1 and 2 are the same? To which they answer, perushe ferish katanila kid shabbat ta'ut upachot mishavet pruta. They're both separate cases. To which they answer, perushe kamefarish. Case number 2 is explaining case number 1. Kid shabbat ta'ut ketzad. How would that be? And then what's the machloket? If so, and then again, this has nothing to do with our case, and it's not a question according to Raba, against Raba. What's the machloket? Mar savar adam yodea she'en kiddushin tovsim b'pachot mishavet pruta v'gamar ba'al she'en kiddushin. Everyone knows that en kiddushin tovsim if less than a shavet pruta. So therefore, when he did the be'ilah after, he obviously did it for the intent of kiddushin. It's a little bit difficult to say this because he obviously didn't know because he accidentally did it with less than a shavet pruta. But I have to explain maybe he figured it. Once he figured it out, he's obviously going to fix it. Or when by the time the marriage came, it became clear. It's a bit of a question. People don't necessarily know this, and therefore, when he had relations with her later, he didn't realize that his first kiddushin was invalid, and therefore he didn't think, "Oh, I'm doing this bi'ah for kiddushin." No, it didn't even occur to him. He did it on the basis he figured, I already betrothed her. Now I'm just going to have relations with her like a husband does with a wife. Second question, I'm going to have relations with you, basically to get betrothed to you, under the condition that my father wants this marriage. Even if the father didn't say he wanted it, mikudeshet, she's still betrothed. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda omer, Rabbi Shimon, ratza ha'av mikudeshet. Lo ratza ha'av, ena mikudeshet. Only if the father wanted it is she mikudeshet. If he didn't want it, she's not mikudeshet. Now, what's the question? Well, it's machloket, and let's go again. It's like it's like one woman and a mistake. It's similar, not exactly the same, but it's right. It's not like there's two marriages here, two women, anything like that. Upligi, to which they say, no, you misunderstood. That's not the debate. The debate isn't, again, when he had relations with her, was he overriding the original stipulation or not, right? Or trying to do a new act of kiddushin, or do we say, no, he was doing it upon the original stipulation? That's not the machloket, like you thought, which was then a question to Raba. But hatam b'hakam miflage. Mar saval al menat shir tza'av. It's really, and this is something we're going to learn in Nedarim a lot, it's a matter of what did he mean by the words he used. If he says al menat shir tza'av, what does that mean? My father wants it, right? There's two ways, okay? Parents can approve of their kids in two ways. They could say, oh, that's great what you're doing. I love the woman you chose. Or they could just kind of be silent and say, right, not say, I don't want you to marry this person, but they're also not going out there saying, I'm so thrilled you're marrying this person, right? They're kind of like, oh, okay, fine. So, amanat shir tza'av means amanat sheyishtokav. What he really wanted was his father didn't get out and loudly say, or not loudly, but say, I will not let you marry this woman. He just wanted his father's silence, to not complain about it. And the father, now what did it say? The father didn't say, I'm, right? Lo ratzah means the father didn't say, I want you to marry her, but he was silent. So the question is, how do you, what is the silence, right? The silence, what was the son looking for? The first opinion says he was looking for silent approval, and that he actually received. Umar savar manat shomar Abaye. The other one thinks that he wanted positive approval, and he didn't get that. He wanted the father to say, yes, I'm very excited about that. V'halo amar Abaye, and the father didn't say that. And that's why the marriage is invalid. Third source, and here we're only going to see the source and a little bit of the question, and we'll get to the answer tomorrow. Modim chachamim l'Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, I'm not going to get into the machloket in a different place, but the chachamim agree with Rabbi Eliezer in the following case. Biktana shisia avia v'nitgarsha. Okay, we have a minor who's betrothed by her father. That means, we talked about this earlier today, kiddushin deoraita. She's married by Torah law. And then she becomes divorced. He divorces her. At that point, she's what's called a yitoma b'chayei av. This is where she now cannot get married until she becomes a grown woman. She can't get married on a Torah level. She's a yitoma b'chayei av, meaning the father can no longer marry her off. The first marriage didn't succeed. He can't marry her again. He loses his rights to betroth her. At this point, either her mother or brother could betroth her or she could betroth herself, but it's only rabbinic law. If hichzira, now what if the original husband takes her back? At this point, he takes her back, she's still a minor. The marriage is only on a rabbinic level. What happens if he dies and they have no children? Choletzet v'lo mityabemet. She can only do chalitza, she can't do yibum. Why? Her divorce is a Torah law divorce, which means she's not allowed to marry the brother, because you can't marry someone who's your brother's divorcee unless there's a chiyuv of yibum, but there's no yibum chiyuv on a Torah level. There's no yibum on a Torah level because when he marries her again, right, it's a crazy situation. She was married to him on a Torah level, and because of that, she's now divorced from him on a Torah level. that makes her brother forbidden, his brother forbidden to her on a Torah level. On a rabbinic level, she's supposed to do yibum with him. So what do we say? You do chalitza, you don't do yibum because of the isur arayot of sleeping with, the man can't sleep with his brother's divorced wife. What is this situation? It's only as I described it. When she was betrothed in the beginning as a minor, and she got remarried as a minor. But if he remarried her when she was already a grown woman, then it's Torah law, and then of course she could do yibum. And oh, by the way, I just didn't say modim chachamim leRabbi Eliezer that in this case she can only do chalitza, not yibum. Rabbi Eliezer said even in a more regular case she can only do a little bit of a different variety on the variation. The rabbis say she could do yibum, and Rabbi Eliezer says she can't. I'm not going to get into the details there. It seems like Rabbi Eliezer forbids a different case because of this case, so that you don't confuse and think this case you could do yibum. Anyway, the point is, that's a side point in terms of the context of where we're up to, but here comes the big line. Or even if he returned her when he remarried her when she was a minor, but she got older, and then he died while she was older, while they were still married, she's already married by Torah law. This sounds like what we saw about Rav before, that when he sleeps with her, has a marital relations with her, once she's already of age, he's redoing the kiddushin to be on a Torah level kiddushin. And right now you're going to see there's a debate. And Rabbi Eliezer says, no. Even in that case, it's not. It's more like Shmuel, right? It's not a Torah law marriage. He was just doing the be'ilah, the relations with her, based on the marriage from before, which was only rabbinic. And here also, I'm just a little bit into Ayin Daled right now. And what do you see here? It's like a mistake of one woman because it's the same person. And there's a machloket. So what do you see here? How could Raba say they don't disagree in that kind of case? Seems like they do. To which we're going to stop here, and we'll pick up with this in tomorrow's daf. Have a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov to everyone.